startups begin in communities across the country.
Why does Silicon Valley get so much credit? My name is Nick Kastner.
And I'm Kaitlyn Clays. We're interviewing the people building startup communities across America.
But in the areas no one is talking about, the middle.
This is the Ecosystem Builder Podcast by mug.news. This is the Ecosystem Builder Podcast. Ecosystem building is the subset of economic development that focuses on fostering entrepreneurial activity within a community. Today's guest is Maddy Fisher, who is based in Northfield, Minnesota. Maddy, thank you so much for coming onto the show.
Yeah, thanks so much. Excited to be here.
Absolutely. So my first question for you is, how did you first become involved in your community, your startup community?
Yeah, for sure. So I was introduced to the idea generally of building an ecosystem around economic development or around startups through an organization called Lead for Minnesota. So that's a state affiliate of a national program called Lead for America that places typically undergraduate like recent grads in places that are either distressed inner cities, on tribal lands, or in rural America. So they kind of really take on like their community's toughest challenges. And so I joined the program right around this time last year, being tasked with building an inclusive ecosystem. I had no idea what that meant. All I knew was I was going to be working with entrepreneurs and getting them connected to the resources that exist in southern Minnesota.
It's very interesting to see how dialogue has changed as well. So ecosystem building, whenever I say that or introduce the podcast to people who aren't familiar with the term, they think science, like science, is that what you're talking about? It's like, no, but.
Yeah, that's funny that you bring that up because so part of the fellowship is that you're placed with either a foundation or a nonprofit of some sort or some sort of government entity. So especially with ecosystem work, I see a lot of this happening in kind of a city or county level with like an EDA or like an economic development authority. And southern Minnesota is really unique in that we don't have what would be called like a regional EDA. So that means that a lot of typical economic development pieces like transit or startup support for entrepreneurs, housing and other things like that don't have a sort of hub to have kind of regional conversations about that. So I was actually placed with a foundation that serves the 20 county region that would typically be under something like that. And one of their kind of typical events that they hold on a yearly basis is called the Entrepreneurial Bridge event. And we actually had someone come and talk about rainforests, which I don't know, Victor Huang, he's former VP at Kauffman Foundation and Right to Start founder and owner. And so he talked a lot about rainforests pretty recently. So I've kind of been trying to explain it to people in that way, because it seems to be, if that's the vernacular that they're used to hearing in terms of nature, it's not so different. So
yes. Huge claps and snaps for that one. We did have Victor on the show and and so rainforest, like that's definitely what I think of. And just like you, that's how I explain it too. It's like you need multiple different avenues and different things for an ecosystem to thrive. And that's the same way with entrepreneurship too.
Totally. Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's awesome. He came and stayed in Albert Lea, which is just about probably 60 miles south of me, where we had held the event. And I think he was excited to see some of the work in action. So I'm excited that this podcast can be kind of another piece to our arsenal now that I know about it. And excited.
100% and happy to help with that too. So with your work, how do you support your community?
Yeah, right now, so the fellowship, I'm still associated with it, but I've gone on full time with the Southern Minnesota Initiative Foundation, which is based in Owatonna. And really my role as an economic development specialist is to support our programming so we have a program called the Rural Entrepreneurial Venture Program, or REV for short. And this helps us to really build on a community to community basis. Since we cover 20 counties, which is one of the largest like regions in Minnesota that our foundation covers, we needed a program that could help us focus in on singular communities. And we really try to do under 5,000 people, just because a lot of the resources that are regional hubs like Mankato or Albert Lea, which I mentioned, in Rochester, which is home to the Mayo Clinic, they really have really vibrant ecosystems, and they have folks that are doing really good work. And there can always be improvements, but we find that these smaller communities just struggle to figure out or even just see that they are part of kind of a bigger ecosystem, and that from building just like kind of neighbor to neighbor type education around entrepreneurship and starting businesses seems to be more effective long-term, which is what we're looking for. We're looking for long-term solutions to collaborating for regional vitality. So I assist with that program. So right now we're in 5 different communities, all under 5,000 people, some of them even under 3,000 people. And we build community groups of entrepreneurs and like bank owners and city workers to do education over a 3-year period in the community about entrepreneurship and starting businesses. And then the kind of other portion of my work is we have a program called the Prosperity Initiative Program, which provides one-on-one business coaching over a 6-month period to BIPOC entrepreneurs. So this is a severely underserved population in our region. And so about 6 years ago, we started up this program, and we've had about 75 entrepreneurs or businesses pass through. And what I like about it is it's all relational. At the end of the day, a lot of these resources are out there and people may know about them or sort of hear about them. But if you don't have someone that you can call up and be like, hey, is there another round of PPP loans happening? And can you help me to at least get into contact with someone where I can like get one in Spanish, or can I get one in Hmong? That's what we hope our coaches can provide. And we've seen really great outcomes over the 75 years. These are really just, small towns with little small businesses, kind of mom and pop shops, whether it's a corner store. We have seen scaling even amongst the companies that come to us, but that's kind of the bigger spiel that I can give you. But if there's anything that you're more curious about, I can talk more in depth.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I find that when working with entrepreneurs and ecosystem builders, it's very much a tough question of like, how do you support your community? And it's like, how don't you? There's a very much jack of all trades sort of, thing that I've noticed with all these different sorts. But I have a question then regarding education. How did you, when you were learning about either at university, how familiar were you with entrepreneurship? Was it something that you studied, or did you kind of stumble into it?
Yeah, I mean, I think I kind of was raised drinking the Kool-Aid. I grew up with 2 entrepreneurs at home. My mom's a small business owner. She worked many years for Target, which is kind of a bigger Fortune 500 that most people know Minnesota for. She found a niche, and she had a business for many, many years, probably up until about 4 years ago. So she was kind of an inspiration to me. Those were her Mary Tyler Moore years, is what I like to call them. That's also a Minnesota reference. And Prince is behind me. So I'm really just selling my whole story about the work that I do is very place-based. So I find a lot of pride in that. And my dad also has been a consultant over many years and was a C-suite guy for most of my childhood. So not as much necessarily sort of very, very small like business owners, but just around a lot of very eccentric entrepreneurs and people that were very passionate. I studied at the University of Minnesota Twin Cities global studies and Spanish and Portuguese. So I love to talk to people, and that's always been my personality-wise, being an extrovert. But I've really stumbled into it because it really aligned with, I knew I wanted to help people. I knew I had a language skill that was needed specifically in rural Minnesota. And I like solving problems and working with people to do that. And so some of the basis that I had growing up has been helpful, but it has definitely been a crash course for me as well. And I'm very transparent with my clients about that. I don't do the business coaching in our program. I really am more of is it feeling like the right fit? Are you, when you go to them and you ask a question, are they getting you connected to a resource? Almost more of that sort of like third-party checker. And I love to create resource guides, and I'm working on a big resource guide for our entire region right now, which is kind of like basically a timeline of like a seed of an idea to prosperity and all of the different programs that our partners have across the region. So that's kind of my shtick.
I really appreciate that. So I'm also a very visual learner as well, personally. And so with entrepreneurship, though, and as working for mug.news, balancing voiceover and the things that I do, it can get very overwhelming. And I found like working with business owners is, again, where do I start? Or I've done this for a month, but I'm realizing I have these issues, but how do I fix them? And it can get so cluttered in your head and so quickly. But to kind of express like that you have this timeline and then these steps too. And as you'll find out, like there's going forwards, going back, going to the sides, left, right. But to have a little bit of that guidance, I'm sure is very helpful, and like it's going to be very looked forward to as you're pursuing it.
Yeah, that's the hope. I think what also is beautiful about our ecosystem here in Southern Minnesota is that it's very It's not only due to its just geographic spread, which, I mean, a lot of folks are like, oh, it's like a couple hours. Like everything is measured here in how many hours it takes to drive, because there's just not a lot of roads some places. And as someone that lived in the Twin Cities for about the past 5 or 6 years, moving to Northfield, I didn't grow up too far from here, but I just think having a source with a specific relational contact at certain organizations is different, because you're exactly right. It's so like when you go to the deed website, or you go to like the federal, I don't know, if you've ever had to try to get your like stimulus check, that's how it feels to be an entrepreneur when you go to these websites looking for funding, looking for other things. It's like, does this even apply to me? So to be able to just call someone, and maybe I'm old school in that, and build that relationship is what I'm hoping that guide can provide for people. And I find that entrepreneurs, they really just want someone to talk to. And I'm happy to be that for them if it helps.
100%. So then, what is something like regarding your area? What's something they wouldn't know about your ecosystem?
Sure. Let me think about that. Every region and every state, and maybe even like larger regions like the Midwest, will always get pigeonholed as specifically an ag economy, which I can totally get, because there's so many things to know in the world, and you don't have to know the minutia of every single thing. But I think that Southern Minnesota, for many years, in the eyes of someone that was born and raised here, but more in the metro than anything, has always been, it's agriculture, but it's also the Mayo Clinic, which is, high tech. We have, Medtronics here, Boston Scientific, and these are, I think it's like 20% of our workforce in the state of Minnesota is healthcare. So it makes sense that people are like, oh, like that's the entrepreneurship, or these like med devices and like super high tech fancy stuff, or ag, which nobody cares about. Nobody really wants to know about, different seeds or like cottage food or things like that. And I think that we've seen a growing interest in that due to the pandemic and people wanting to eat locally. But I would say that some of the businesses that are approaching us, not only to be a part of our programs, or that we're finding through the Rural Entrepreneurial Venture Program, like people who live in like small towns that have these thriving online e-commerce businesses that we would have never known about if we weren't honestly knocking door to door in certain communities, or coming to us for loans or different things like that. I think COVID has been really weird in that way, because we've seen a lot of young people come home, but the thriving e-commerce community here in Southern Minnesota is really interesting, but also bizarre, because you just wouldn't anticipate it. So I'd say that's probably one thing that I would just push people in Minnesota, or from, other parts of the country, to think about is we have the space, we have the workforce that are interested in these type of jobs or distribution and manufacturing. And that is kind of a unique skill, or like sort of set that we're bringing to the state stage, and then also nationally.
It's wild with that you bring up e-commerce. So it's something that is kind of unfamiliar to me. I'm not a huge online shopper, but with the pandemic, I've definitely become more spatially aware, at least, of all of like the different options that we have. On this show, or on separate shows related to mug.news, we've actually had entrepreneurs who have thriving businesses. And one of the questions I add is, do you have a physical space? Because a lot of times, like, they didn't, and they're thriving so strongly. Their internet and social profile is so strong that they don't need a brick and mortar. And so that was something I picked up on. See, I keep thinking it's like, oh, a building, and that's not always the case, especially nowadays.
Yeah, definitely.
So then, if people were trying to start a business in Southern Minnesota, in your community, what are they eligible for any grants or interest-free loans that you'd recommend?
Yeah, I would say just wearing my foundation cap is that, we're always looking for businesses that are looking to land and are looking to make long-term roots in Southern Minnesota. We're not the only foundation that is looking to do that. I would probably say we're the one that covers the largest geographic area, but we definitely have partners in places like Rochester or Red Wing, Albert Lee, Owatonna, places in Austin, that would definitely, be interested in talking with anybody that's just interested in what's available out here. I think what's also fun, and maybe other people wouldn't find it as pleasing as I do, but, small town bank culture is still a really like part and parcel of our region. And so one-to-one banking relationships is something that we really push as ecosystem builders, not only myself, but other people that I know working in the field. as something that we just want to continue to push encourage people to try out, because there are a lot of smaller credit unions. So I think that there's always going to be an opportunity for people to find, competitive funding opportunities here. It's really just about making relationship. We are a pretty rural part, but it's definitely available.
I think that's, you're definitely reminding me from home. I'm actually from Stroytville, Minnesota, which is right outside Rochester.
Oh, yeah.
So that family banking or the one-on-one banking was definitely, it's reminding me a lot of family members saying, I'm going to go see so-and-so at the bank. And that one-on-one name basis creates that huge comfortability and like that personably, like, making yourself more comfortable with the people you're working with. So I think that's a really beautiful thing to bring up, and that I really do see more specifically in the Midwest, for sure.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I mean, my scope, my field or like scope of reference is very small, and I've been in this work for, basically a year now, but that's really something that I try to bring to this work, because I think that Band-Aid solutions can be really helpful. Sometimes entrepreneurs really will come to us and are like, I literally just need to know how to do QuickBooks like yesterday. And that is like, it's really, obviously it feels good to be like, check, they're good. And like, we give them a call 6 months later and they're good to roll. But I just think that, if we really are looking for long-term viability of these businesses in our region, and we want them to not only have viability in their company, but also in their sense of place and community, that we just have to be, thinking of ways to bring them into the fold. And a lot of that work at the foundation has centered around diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how we can make, these funding opportunities and capital that seems to be like people like angel investors, they exist. And it's like, okay, but we know who they are. Like, why are we not just getting people directly connected? So it's a gift to be able to be that kind of that bridge for folks. And it's definitely a something I try to focus in on the work when we're more in the day-to-day stuff,
Right. So you mentioned DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. My follow-up question with that is, what are ways that you and your business, support DEI in your community?
Sure. Yeah. So the foundation, we not only apply for grants in order to do some of our programming, but we also are a grantor. And so we do have grant programs that support economic development in kind of a wider sense and more of a community-oriented lens. So our prosperity initiative is definitely one of our kind of key pillars in our DEI plan, because it is really specifically focused on African Americans, Indigenous folks, people of color, and then veterans as well. So we give preference to those for this coaching opportunity, because typically those are folks that are not having access to some of the same resources from the very beginning, whether it's from, high school education, or junior achievement, or any sort of programs that the public schools in our state have to offer, all the way through, obviously starting a business and having access to capital and financial resources. So that's one piece. Our grants, we did a pretty competitive grant round this time last year, which we called our Inclusive and Equitable Communities grant, which we encouraged people to focus on how they could build an entrepreneurial ecosystem, but also left it open-ended for folks that are just working on, working with diverse communities on all sorts of different issues. But some of the cool projects that have come out of that is a project in Mankato, Minnesota, which is called Tapestry, which is actually run through the Minnesota Council of Churches. But it's been a project for many years, but it's kind of gone through different iterations as to what it really is looking to engage with folks on. And at first it was about having conversations around race in your community. So they had sort of these book clubs, and they would meet very often to talk about race and racialization. And what it's really segued into over the past couple of years is wanting to pair recent immigrants with longstanding business owners in the community, and opening up a dialogue around why people who are entrepreneurial in nature or have owned businesses in their country of origin maybe are really feeling like it's not possible for them to own a business here, whether that's due to documentation or just more generally immigration status, or if it's due to racialization and feeling like they're being profiled, not having banking connections, not understanding the legal systems of, it's a huge, huge thing. So that's one of the grants that we funded. We've been funding it for about 12 months now. We have about 6 more months on that funding, but there are a few other projects like that across our region that we've been able to just sit in on and sort of hear, from the ground up. I mean, it's an ecosystem, right? So we want to know from the very bottom all the way up to the top what's going on. But I think that as one of the only people on our team that is tasked with focusing on DEI, I've really been pushing for that grant round to be either something that's more consistently funded or to have that be, how are we looking at our guidelines internally for not only hiring, but for our grants, just making sure that if we want to fund the ecosystem, that we're open to giving money to folks without having like all these labels on it. And I think that we've been making good strides, and that grant is a great example of that.
So then also regarding like those resources, that education, if someone were then to kind of move to your community, what advice do you have for them in their very first step when they're trying to start a business?
Sure. Yeah. The state of Minnesota is unique in that we have, and maybe you'll know this, do other places have what is called a Small Business Development Center? It's called SBDC.
I am not familiar. I'm not sure.
Okay. So these are quasi-government entities that are offshoots of SBA, but they provide one-on-one coaching on business plans and like questions about registration and things, and it's free. And they're actual consultants. Like, they're not just like people who are like, I kind of like business and know some stuff. Like, they are like tried and true, like have business degrees, are public attorneys, like they are people who do auditing, like, people that have like lots of credentials. And I'm not sounding smart when I talk about that because that's not my field. I just get them connected and say, give me a call if you need anything. So I would suggest if you're in any of our regional hubs or you're semi near one, to go to an SBDC. If you are finding that you're having questions about getting registered as an LLC or any other, registration type, and look into nonprofits. I mean, I would say that most within 30 to 40 miles driving distance, there's going to be a major nonprofit that funds some level of entrepreneurial education, has competitive loan programs or different things like that. If you just like literally search your town and foundation, I think that would probably be a good place to start. But always happy to field any questions because, I'm tasked with a large geographic region and I know lots of folks. And if I don't know them, I'll find them.
It reminds me a little bit so first of all, this is more business and very much like they have the trained professionals too. Our local libraries are actually very equipped to handle answer any ecosystem questions as well, or entrepreneurship guides, resources.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Our chambers. I mean, I think that some are more connected than others, which is only natural. Chambers of commerce, or even the tourism ones, historical societies, for as crazy as it might sound, they really just, they not only know the history, but they also know the ongoing relationships and kind of what the vibe is of the community. So that's been kind of a unique twist for me to find. A few people from the Historical Society kind of like do you know where Preston is? Preston,
yes.
Minnesota?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like got into contact with me, and it was just like really interesting. I was like, oh, I didn't really know that. Like, and they're like, well, yeah, I mean, we're historians. Of course we're going to know. And I was like, yeah, I guess I didn't think that far ahead.
Well, seriously, no, that's your reaction is how I felt with library systems. I'm like, of course they do. Like, of course they know. It's like a huge, it's for education. Like, those are libraries. I always, I was a big, fantasy book reader. And so I didn't really think about, of course there's other options and other avenues.
Yeah, like nonfiction books.
Yeah, I know, right?
I totally feel you on that. That's so funny.
But definitely checking those places that you wouldn't think. Again, so I wouldn't think of those smaller businesses. I originally wouldn't have thought of libraries, and now definitely history is now on my list of things to consider. Totally. So then in your area, are there any co-working spaces dedicated or working areas for entrepreneurs?
Yeah, I mean, there are hopes for an incubator or a co-working space here in Northfield. We're a small community. I mean, 20,000 people doesn't feel small to me anymore, but it is pretty small, with two larger liberal arts colleges here, but a pretty thriving downtown community. So there are hopes for one here. I know that there's one in Rochester, right in downtown Rochester, called the Collider, and they're a big partner of ours. Austin has one as well, which is just down the street from the Spam Museum. So if you need a double reason to go to Austin, Minnesota, you already have one. You can go to a co-working space and go and learn about spam. It's free. And I do believe that there's a Mankato incubator. But yeah, we're always pushing for more. And I think one of the other questions that you were maybe curious about too is like coffee shops where people hang out to like do co-working. Sure. The one that I like the best, and it may be just because I have a preference for this coffee shop generally, is Cafe Steam in Rochester. And they have 2 locations, and it's incredible coffee and it's incredible company. And they also tend to, if you're super nice, provide free coffee if you're there working at the Collider co-working space. So it's worth the drive for me. It's about an hour away, but I always end up meeting really, really interesting people there.
Cafe Steam, and I will say this on the books, but it is my favorite coffee shop in Rochester. I am right there with you. They have open mic nights. And now during the pandemic, I haven't been there during the pandemic, but I know prior they had, open mic nights, and it was just so cozy and nice to sit in.
Yeah. Yeah. I think they're starting to do them again. I mean, obviously with it getting colder, they may, end up not doing as many, but I have to say the other one I really do like in Rochester, and now it sounds like I'm a total Rochester fanatic, but is Fiddlehead. But it is more of a Mayo hangout, which doesn't mean that there's not entrepreneurs there, but it's a good one too if you haven't checked that out.
Yeah, I have not heard that one. My mom's a nurse at Mayo. She had transferred, but she did originally work in Rochester, Mayo, but I don't remember her mentioning Fiddlehead. But no, it sounds so fun. Sounds so cute.
Yeah, super cute.
So then, if people were looking for more information about startup events, where would you direct them to check out to find out more about those events?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, MinCup, which I can't believe I haven't brought up MinCup until now, but it's like one of the largest business competitions in the country and has given out, I went to their event a couple weeks ago, and 3 entrepreneurs from Southern Minnesota, specifically from Rochester, received a ton of money, and one of them won. It's called Nano Dropper. They're a really cool startup, solving problems that I didn't know I had, and I love that. I love that about entrepreneurs. I'm like, didn't even realize that was an issue. Thanks for figuring that out. MinCup has given out like $400 million over the past 16 years to local startups that are, I think it's pretty much you have to have one co-owner or co-founder that lives in the state of Minnesota. And they do a really good job of not only, promoting their own event and doing the business thing, like doing the business competition, but they also are really good about, disseminating information about startup events. And I know Startup Week was 2 weeks ago now here in the Twin Cities. So I know that there is a Startup MN page that's really good. I know I follow them on LinkedIn, or I'm just trying to think like more broadly, like Launch Minnesota, which is an offshoot of our DEED, which is our economic development authority for the state. And they are really passionate about ecosystem building. They have a kind of what they're called an Entrepreneurs First collaboration office in Red Wing, Minnesota, which is called Red Wing Ignite. And it's basically like every partner that is doing ecosystem building in Southern Minnesota. And we get together on a monthly basis and talk about, how's it going? Are there any businesses we should be keeping our eyes on, or, trying to convince to come or stay, or, all of the things. So they are really good about getting out. Red Wing Ignite is really good about getting out information about events, and Collider too, I would say. I think that the foundation, we not only do economic development, but also early childhood could be a good place. If you're looking for something that's happening regionally. Otherwise, kind of these different hubs tend to have some of the more day-to-day opportunities or webinars and things like that I think people would be interested in knowing about.
And then so regarding your area, do you have any, notable or successful entrepreneurs that first come to mind from your area?
How do I want to play favorites today?
I know. So it's a tricky one. That's why we say notable, or what comes to your mind first.
Sure. I mean, I'll always toot Craig's horn a little bit here, but in Faribault, Minnesota, which is just about 20 minutes south of me off of 35, has a company called Crybaby Craig's, and they make hot sauce, and they have they make it all in-house, and they still distribute it and manufacture it in Faribault, Minnesota. But funny enough, I was up in the Twin Cities last weekend at a cool, hip place in St. Paul having brunch. And I was like, yeah, can I get some hot sauce? And they brought Crybaby Craig's to the table, and I could have screamed. I was so excited. But Craig is one of the most passionate and hard on his sleeve person I have ever met. And he spoke at our event last week, our Entrepreneurial Bridge event in Albert Lee, and got a tear to every single person's eye there. his story of starting that business and his passion for what he does is just really admirable. And he also makes a damn good hot sauce. And I'm sure that it would ship to you. And they're currently opening up a storefront in Faribault, which I think would really kind of be a unique edge. I would never think of like a hot sauce shop, but their logo is really cute and they sell a lot of like merchandise and things like that too. So that's my one I'll keep it to today, I think.
Oh, I love hot sauce. No, it sounds so sweet. I love the crybaby, and especially like with hot sauce, it really can get you going.
Yeah. I think he said in his kind of little TED Talky thing that he did at our event, he did name it after his son. His name is Craig, but his son is Craig Jr. Craig Craig. And I think I may have it, and it's worth showing.
Yes. Go get it. Oh, that's so funny.
Even like got it on the top.
Got it on the top.
So it's like a guy with stubble and he's like crying out in pain and he's got like a star headband on and like some long hockey hair.
Yeah, and it's a good old stash.
They're classic. It's the habanero and garlic hot sauce. And it's so good.
See, I was expecting like a picture of a toddler or, like an actual baby, but I think that does the job just as well.
Yeah.
Totally. So with a couple last questions, but one of them is, do you have any news outlets, podcast, blogs that you recommend entrepreneurs go ahead and check out, whether that be regarding your area or entrepreneurship?
Yeah. I would say the Rochester Rising podcast is really good, which they interview entrepreneurs one-on-one. Who else do I like? Geez. I mean, I do like when Right to Start will put out a new episode. I love the case study piece. And Victor is like a celebrity to me. And the fact that I met him is so cool. I got to even eat dinner with him. It was amazing. Anything Del Gines does, and he also knows this. So if he ever hears this, I definitely introduced him at like a summit as like the coolest guy or like my biggest hero or something, which I do stand by. Del Gines works for the Federal Reserve in Kansas City. Kauffman Foundation, whatever Kauffman Foundation does, I eat up. I think that they're incredible. Co-starters, I really like their work too. And they think more like strategic, like large, like even larger ecosystem than I'm typically used to thinking about. They talk a lot about facilitation too. And they're really cool. I like them as well. But podcast wise, that's tough. I haven't really found the one that I've fallen in love with yet.
Yeah, I think you gave some great resources though, and those news outlets and being able to keep an eye out for those upcoming episodes is definitely a great start. And then I guess my last question is, do you have any final thoughts, any advice that you have, or any resources you recommend the listeners check out? Sure.
Let's see. If you can find a roadmap, even if you stick to it for 1 week and it helps you to just get through that week, that it's worth it. I think we talked about earlier in this podcast that, it can just feel so overwhelming. And it honestly is really frustrating when you go to people and they're like, well, there's a resource for that. It's like, I would just really have entrepreneurs focus more on a relationship versus, finding like, I got a guy for that. It's like, I hope that you just have a guy, like, and that's okay if that guy can't really help you with everything and he can do referrals. I think it's good to know multiple people in different places, but I just think the more that we can think relationally, it will help us longer term. And to just kind of find those people, and this is something that we talked a lot about at our event last week, is just find the people, either other entrepreneurs or people that work kind of in the space, ecosystem builders, that you can call up when you have a question and sometimes you just want to talk and sometimes you want solutions. And I think that it's perfectly fine to have a good mix of that, and to sort of build out your team in that way. So I would just encourage people to continue. If you're doing that, keep it up. If you've never really tried that out, I think, put yourself in a little bit of an uncomfortable zone and try it out.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Maddy, for all your time. It's been fantastic to get to talk to you, hear about crybabies.
Yeah.
But thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, it was a pleasure.
Now that we've learned about an ecosystem from a person who's building it, I'm going to link back up with Nick to clarify on some jargon and take a deeper dive into this ecosystem.
Kaitlyn, how was your conversation with Maddie?
It was really fun. It's always nice to talk to a fellow Minnesotan, so there was also very much a treat to get to chat with her.
Yes, yeah, your Minnesota Connect runs deep. What were your biggest takeaways?
Well, okay, so it was really cool to get to check in, and she was saying words like Preston, Albert Lee, Austin. I was like, I know all those places. So it was really cool to get to hear how that ecosystem and that entrepreneurship community, bless you,
Thank you. I'm sorry.
No worries.
I was trying not to make that obnoxious, and it wasn't obnoxious, but it still came on camera. So yeah, excuse me, everyone. Keep on going, Kaitlyn.
Just that it was really cool to get to see how the entrepreneurship community has grown since I've left. I left the Midwest 2020, and so it's been really cool to get to hear how ag entrepreneurship is going in addition to small businesses, and just hearing Maddie embellish more on that topic was really cool to get to observe.
Ag entrepreneurship is one sector that you would think the Midwest could just destroy in. And there's examples of us doing really well, so it's always great to highlight those. Was there anything you had to look up?
No, not today, but she is working on a super cool project, and I can't wait for it to kind of come out. So I've kind of mentioned I'm a visual learner, but what she has kind of in her head right now is like a process of a timeline, and then under those timelines for like building your business are resources. So it's like if you're in grant funding, looking for grants, like here's resources, so you go down. But she was just kind of touching on that. That's something in the works, so I'm excited to keep an eye out for that when it does come out.
Yes, absolutely. Well, Kaitlyn, is there anything else you wanted to touch on?
Well, I said it in the podcast, but go check out Cafe Steam in Rochester, Minnesota. It is the best coffee shop. I think it's my favorite, but we touched on that. But also, again, it's really cool to see how far Rochester has grown in the southern Minnesota area.
If that's it, do you mind if I read us out?
Absolutely, go for it.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of the Ecosystem Builder Podcast, which is a product of mug.news and hosted by myself, Nick Kastner, and my TikTok famous co-host, Caitlin Clays. If you have any questions about today's episode, connect with us on social media at Nick Kastner, at Clays Creates, or at Mug News Official. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Podchaser, and share the link with your friends. We release episodes every single Wednesday morning, so make sure you follow so you don't miss a beat.
See you next time.